May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. I read an article the other day about 13 celebrities who bought homes for their parents after they became Hollywood stars. Chris Pratt, whom you probably know from the Avengers movies, said, "I bought my mom a house when I was 23 years old. I wasn't rich. I had just enough to buy the house. I was rich for a second, and then I was poor, but my mom had a house." Michael B. Jordan from the Black Panther movies bought a mansion for his parents and himself to live in together back in 2015. And he often jokes about being roommates with his parents. He said, "It's every kid's dream to buy their mom and dad a house." After escaping an abusive marriage with Ike Turner, Tina Turner made it big on her own. And in an interview with Rolling Stone magazine in 1986, said, "I have a home now. I always wanted a home, but I didn't have one because my parents broke up. I was determined to have that foundation. So I bought my mother a house, and now we all go there. My sons, my sister, her daughter. I'm reliving something that I wanted when I was a child. I've made that dream a reality." What's so heartwarming about those stories? They're more than just stories of celebrities buying expensive houses for their parents. It's about celebrities using their wealth to create places of belonging with the ones that they love. And it's nice because we're all too familiar with celebrities who seem obsessed with themselves, who seem out of touch, who mostly use their wealth to elevate themselves above the rest of us. But these celebrities seem more like us, who haven't forgotten who they are, who give of themselves to create a place of belonging and welcome, a home with someone else. And I think that in that sense, these stories point us to what true greatness is really all about. Not about becoming rich or famous, not about celebrating ourselves, not about being better than anyone else, but lifting up and welcoming others in love. It's a lesson that the disciples have yet to learn in this morning's gospel. As the disciples walked along the road to Galilee, they're arguing about which one of them is the greatest. Jesus had been telling them that they were headed to Jerusalem, where he would be betrayed into the hands of men, suffer and die before being raised again on the third day. But it just didn't compute. Their ideas about what the Messiah was supposed to come and do was already too fixed in their minds. For them, it was all about wealth and power and status. While Jesus is focused on the self-giving nature of God's love, the disciples are focused on being greater than the other. So when they're in the house in Capernaum, Jesus says to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." And then he takes a small child up into his arms and says, "Whoever welcomes a child in my name, a child such as this welcomes me, but not only me, the one who sent me. It's greatness defined as serving, as lifting up and welcoming. And making his point with a child is significant. Children in the ancient world had no status, no legal rights, and apart from normal household affections, were given little notice. In fact, even slaves had more status than children because slaves were often given authority over a household's children. So Jesus' words certainly would have been shocking to the disciples. What? You want us to serve children? We don't know exactly on what the disciples were staking their claim to greatness. Maybe they were bragging about the things they had already done in Jesus' name, the demons they had cast out, the sick that they had healed chapters earlier when Jesus had sent them out on their mission. But Jesus makes it clear that their idea of greatness was really more about stoking their own egos than help they'd offered to anyone else. And Jesus' point is really simply this: to truly love others, you can't just love them at arm's length. You have to embrace them. You have to welcome them. You have to put your own ego down to lift the other up. And of course, that was Jesus' own path. That's the path of the incarnation and the cross. And if we're going to follow him, it's our path too. To take us into his arms and welcome us. Jesus had to leave the glory that was his at his Father's side. He emptied himself and became one without rank, without status, without worldly power. He took the form of a servant and became poor to minister to the poor, embraced weakness so that he could embrace the weak, endured suffering and shame to be with and dignify the suffering and shame of others. You see, Jesus has not loved us at arm's length. He hasn't just sort of sprinkled us with blessings from on high. He's come to us as one of us, taken us up into his arms and welcomed us. And to welcome him into our lives, we have to welcome others in the same way. A few years ago, a fellow named Steve Corbett published a book titled When Helping Hurts: How to Alleviate Poverty Without Hurting the Poor or Yourself. And it's a fascinating book. And as the title suggests, there's a way of trying to help others that looks good and even feels good, but actually does harm. And basically, he wants us to see how even when we have the best of intentions, we harm others when we try to help them at arm's length, from a distance, without really understanding who they are and what their real needs are. And of the many powerful examples that he gives, one very simple one that he tells about his own experience is going on a short-term mission trip to a rural area and spending the day painting somebody's porch. And he said while he was standing on the ladder painting, several able-bodied men who live in that house just sat and watched him all day. And he said it felt really odd to him. And at the end of the day, he wondered what it was like for them to not just be people who couldn't afford paint for their house, but to be treated as if they couldn't even be expected to hold a brush. Their porch had been painted, but what harm had been done to their souls as people whose deepest need was to be respected and included, who might have been better served by being given a brush and invited up on to the ladder. Corbett explains that when you ask Americans what poverty is like, they usually describe it as a lack of food, a lack of clothing, a lack of shelter, a lack of money. We tend to think in very materialistic terms, right? But he says when you ask people in poverty what poverty is like, they often say things like, I feel less than human. I feel shame. I feel like a problem that everyone wants to get rid of. Do you see the difference? We want to meet material needs. We want to alleviate physical suffering. And they want that too. But do you hear the deeper need? The even deeper suffering that needs to be addressed, that we can address. They don't want to be treated as problems to be solved and dismissed, but as human beings to be valued and welcomed. In other words, people and communities don't want us to just airdrop ourselves into their lives like celebrities or rock stars and buy them houses and just jet out of there. Mission accomplished. Let's give ourselves a pat on the back. Even as we help them, they want to be loved as our neighbors. They want to be welcomed. They don't want our community to fix their community. They want us to be part of the same community, the same human family. And that's true for us as we think about what it means to be a church connected with our community and the world. It's also true for us as we think about caring for one another, entering one another's world within our own church family. But just understand that the problem isn't all about pride. We genuinely care, right? We want to be real help. But sometimes we're not aware of just how uncomfortable the suffering of the other makes us feel. How suffering makes us anxious, or sometimes even makes us feel guilty, and how awkward helping can sometimes feel. But then when we structure our helping around those things, when our helping becomes more about alleviating our own feelings rather than genuinely caring for the other, we end up helping them at arm's length. We move to help without understanding. We give them what makes us feel better and not what they really need. We go for the quick fix rather than walking alongside of them as equals. And that's when we're most likely to write checks instead of starting conversations. When we paint the porch for them instead of with them. So we have to keep Jesus' words and actions in the forefront of our mind. The greatness of God's love is expressed when our help is in the embrace and the welcome of the other. When our actions don't just say, I want to help you, but I want to welcome you and experience your welcome. You don't need to be ashamed. You matter. We are part of the same family of God. And that's the moment we are embracing Jesus himself, and not just Jesus, but the one who sent Jesus. The moment that we are welcoming and receiving God into our own hearts. And that's when the welcome of Christ becomes most visible in the world. Amen.